Psychology says your life is secretly being controlled by cognitive biases you don't even know exist. You don't realize it, but these invisible mental shortcuts are sabotaging your decisions, relationships, and finances every single day. What feels like rational thought is actually a series of predictable errors hardwired into your brain's psychology, keeping you stuck in patterns that destroy your potential. 1. Confirmation bias. This cognitive bias makes you exclusively seek out, interpret, and recall information that confirms your existing beliefs. You'll spend hours finding articles that support your political view while instantly dismissing ones that challenge it. You'll focus on the one time your horoscope was right and ignored the 50 times it was wrong. And you'll remember every comment that validates your insecurity while forgetting all the praise you receive. Psychology calls this tendency to filter reality confirmation bias. Your brain does this to protect your worldview and reduce the mental strain of processing conflicting information. What feels like diligent research is actually your brain's shortcut psychology building an echo chamber around you. 2. Sunk cost fallacy. This cognitive bias makes you continue a failing endeavor because of the time, money, or effort you've already invested. You'll keep pouring money into a failing business because you've already invested your life savings. You'll stay in a toxic relationship for years because of the history you share. Or you finish a terrible movie because you're already halfway through. Psychology shows this stems from loss aversion. The pain of admitting a loss feels worse than the pain of continuing to lose. You think you're deciding rationally, but what feels like commitment is actually the sunk cost fallacy trapping you in a bad decision. 3. Availability heuristic. This cognitive bias makes you overestimate the likelihood of events that are more easily recalled in memory. You worry more about a dramatic but rare plane crash than a common but mundane car accident. You buy a lottery ticket after seeing a big winner on the news, convinced your odds have improved. And you might avoid swimming in the ocean after watching a shark movie. Psychology calls this a heuristic because your brain uses a mental shortcut, assuming that if something is easy to remember, it must be common. What appears logical is actually your brain's shortcut psychology distorting your perception of risk. 4. Recency bias. This cognitive bias makes you place greater importance on the most recent information you've received. An investor might panic and sell all their stocks after a single bad day in the market, ignoring months of positive growth. A manager might give a performance review based only on an employee's work from the last 2 weeks. And you might decide a restaurant is terrible after one bad meal, forgetting years of good experiences. Your brain does this because recent memories are more accessible and feel more relevant. You think you're making a current, informed choice, but psychology shows it's often recency bias clouding your long-term jugement. 5. Anchoring bias. This cognitive bias makes you over-rely on the very first piece of information you receive when making decisions. The first price you see for a car sets the anchor for the entire negotiation, making subsequent, slightly lower prices seem like a great deal. A doctor who hears one symptom first may anchor their diagnosis to it, overlooking other critical signs. And a salary negotiation is heavily influenced by the first number put on the table. Your brain uses this first piece of data as a reference point for all future judgments. What feels like good negotiation is actually the anchoring bias limiting your perspective from the very start. 6. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. This cognitive bias leads people with low ability at a task to overestimate their own competence. It's the amateur investor who thinks they can beat the market after one lucky stock pick. The new driver who believes they have the skills of a pro, or the person who, after watching a few online tutorials, believes they are an expert on a complex subject. Psychology explains this happens because the very skills needed to recognize incompetence are the same skills that are lacking. You think you're being self-aware. But the Dunning-Kruger effect can create a dangerous blind spot where you are most vulnerable. 7. Hindsight bias. This cognitive bias is the tendency to see past events as having been more predictable than they actually were. After a stock market crash, you might say, "I knew it was going to happen." After a surprise ending in a movie, you convince yourself you saw all the clues. And after a political election, people claim the outcome was obvious all along. It's often called the "I knew it all along" phenomenon. Your brain reconstructs memories to fit the outcome, creating a false sense of predictability. What feels like sharp intuition is actually hindsight bias, making you overconfident in your ability to predict the future. 8. Cognitive dissonance. This is the mental discomfort experienced when holding two or more contradictory beliefs or when your beliefs clash with your actions. To resolve this discomfort, your brain will ignore or rationalize away the contradiction. You might be a smoker who knows it causes cancer, but you tell yourself the risk is overblown to reduce the dissonance. You buy an expensive, unnecessary gadget and then convince yourself it was an essential purchase. Or you act unkindly to someone and then justify it by deciding they deserved it. What feels like making peace with a decision is often your brain protecting you from the psychological stress of cognitive dissonance. 9. The bandwagon effect. This cognitive bias makes you do or believe things because many other people are doing or believing the same. You might buy a particular stock simply because it's popular and everyone is talking about it. You adopt a fashion trend you don't even like because it's in. Or you vote for a political candidate because they are leading in the polls. This stems from an evolutionary need to conform for social acceptance and survival. You think you're making an independent choice. But psychology shows the bandwagon effect often means you read just following the crowd instead of your own judgment. 10. Negativity bias. This cognitive bias means that things of a more negative nature have a greater effect on your psychological state than neutral or positive things. You can receive 10 compliments and 1 insult, but you'll spend all day thinking about the insult. You'll focus on the one thing that went wrong in your day instead of the many things that went right. And you'll remember a past failure with more clarity than a past success. From an evolutionary standpoint, it was more important to remember the threat of a predator than the beauty of a sunset. What feels like being realistic is often your negativity bias, coloring your entire world in a darker shade. 11. Optimism bias. This cognitive bias is the belief that you are less likely to experience a negative event compared to others. It's why you might text while driving, thinking an accident won't happen to you. It's why you might not save enough for retirement believing you'll be fine financially. And it's why people start businesses with an unrealistic belief in their success, ignoring the high failure rates. This bias can be motivating, but it also leads to poor risk assessment. You think you're being positive, but unregulated optimism bias can lead you to make dangerously unprepared decisions about your future. 12. Status quo bias. This cognitive bias makes you prefer that things stay the same, resisting change even when it offers clear benefits. You'll stick with your old, slow phone provider rather than go through the hassle of switching. You'll stay in a dead-end job because the thought of searching for a new one is uncomfortable. Or you'll order the same meal at a restaurant every time instead of trying something new. Your brain defaults to the current state because it is familiar and requires less mental effort. What feels like comfortable preference is actually status quo bias, keeping you from progress and better opportunities. These cognitive biases aren't personal failures. Psychology shows every human has them. They are mental shortcuts your brain evolved to make quick judgments and conserve energy. The difference between successful and unsuccessful people is not that one group lacks biases. It's that successful people have learned to recognize their biases and account for them. Awareness is the first step to breaking free from these automatic, flawed patterns. If you want to understand the psychology controlling your decisions and finally break free from the grip of these cognitive biases, subscribe to this channel. The next video reveals the practical techniques you can use to recognize your specific biases in the moment and start making truly better life decisions.